Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, September 19th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, we dig into some renewed questions about free speech after Jimmy Kimmel was pulled off the air. Plus, immigrants are being locked up alone, and Clayton Kershaw announces his upcoming retirement from baseball. President Donald Trump said overwhelming negative coverage of him by television networks should be grounds for the Federal Communications Commission to revoke broadcast licenses.
I read someplace that the networks were 97% against me. I got 97% negative, and yet I won it easily. I won all 7 swing states, popular, but won everything. And then 97% against. They give me only bad publicity or press. I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away. It will be up to Brendan Carr.
Trump made the suggestion as he defended FCC Chairman Brendan Carr for pressuring ABC to pull comedian Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show off the airwaves over comments Kimmel made about the killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Kimmel was suspended indefinitely. Among Trump's renewed attacks on critics, he also said that protesters who yelled at him during a dinner in Washington, D.C. were a threat who could be jailed, and declared the anti-fascist Antifa movement a terrorist organization whose funding he would try to track. As for Jimmy Kimmel, ABC's suspension of his show, combined with threats from Trump officials to go after left-leaning organizations they say have incited violence, has alarmed Democrats and First Amendment advocates over free speech concerns in the wake of Kirk's shooting. As for this latest chapter to the conversation on free speech and hate speech, I rang up Tennessee and First Amendment reporter Angel Latham to discuss. Angel, thank you so much for joining me today on The Excerpt.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So let's just start with this. I mean, what have we seen in the week or so since Charlie Kirk's killing in terms of, some on the right pushing for individuals to face consequences at their jobs after they posted negative comments about Kirk or his conservative ideology?
We've seen a really strong wave of kind of social media backlash towards people who have posted negative comments about Kirk. Now, there's been a lot of people who have posted just their political opinions about Kirk, or maybe something about his position in Turning Point USA, and even some, pretty reprehensible comments about his murder. And while most of this is all very legally protected speech, there's been an incredible wave of pushback from a lot of conservative lawmakers and political influencers and people like that who are calling for disciplinary action against them, termination from their positions. A lot of professors are being scrutinized and disciplined by the universities that they are employed at, stuff like that.
All right, well, what actually is hate speech, and is it protected by the First Amendment?
That's a great question. So hate speech is actually just kind of a conceptual term to refer to language that we consider to vilify people or demean people for certain characteristics, discriminate people, etc. But it's not actually defined by the law. That's never been a thing that's ever been laid out as kind of like a corner of the First Amendment. While hate speech is thrown around by the courts a lot and discussed, it's not a defined thing. And so the courts have ruled repeatedly that it is protected speech. Because the thing about hate speech is that it's purely subjective to the listener's own biases. And so judges have ruled that it really can't be used as a neutral basis for law.
All right, that makes sense. So what speech then is not protected? What are some maybe specific exceptions?
There are areas of speech that are not protected by the First Amendment. Of course, there's some, strange little niche legal gray areas, but the main things that are not protected are any words that are incitement to imminent lawless action. So words that could immediately create an illegal action. Speech that's considered a true threat, which usually means something that could reliably be interpreted to immediately threaten serious bodily harm. Fighting words or speech that causes an immediate breach of peace. Notice that immediacy is a very common threat in these. Obscenity is not protected by the First Amendment, though speech has to pass through a very rigorous test to be defined as obscenity. That is a very fluid area of the First Amendment. And your normal stuff like perjury, defamation, and fraud.
All right. Well, I think a lot of corners of American society are having versions of this conversation in recent days. I mean, how is all this landing with political leaders and lawmakers?
Yeah, so there's been just a massive wave of attention to this issue of hate speech. Again, it's not clearly defined by law, so you're seeing a very wide range of interpretations of what we're considering hate speech, and then a lot of reactions to what people think should be done about hate speech. On, I think it was Wednesday, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi made some very specific comments regarding hate speech, saying that her department will be going after hate speech and saying it has no place in society following Kirk's death. Now, that comment got a lot of pushback from across the aisle, and she kind of walked back those comments on X.
All right. Angel Latham covers the First Amendment for the Tennessean, part of the USA Today network. Angel, I love the work that you do on this beat. Keep it up, and thanks for hopping on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Meanwhile, comedians in and around the late night world are speaking out this week. Jon Stewart opened up his show with a set decked out in gold and sarcastically praised President Donald Trump, calling him perfectly tinted and pretending to shush the audience when they booed at Trump. Seth Meyers echoed sentiments that the First Amendment right to freedom of speech is under threat following Kimmel's fallout, and he assured fans that his show won't change its tone out of fear of retaliation. Stephen Colbert also stood behind Kimmel, but former Saturday Night Live cast member Rob Schneider had a different tone, saying that there was no attempt at humor in Kimmel's comments, and that, as he put it, he doesn't want to hear about someone getting upset for losing a show when they weren't upset about a young father getting murdered for having conversations. You can read more reaction with a link in today's show notes. New data show thousands more immigrants were held in solitary confinement under the Biden administration than had been reported, and the use of segregation tactics remains high under the Trump administration. I spoke with USA Today national immigration reporter Lauren Villagran for more. Lauren, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Taylor.
So what does the data tell us about this issue and how many migrants held in custody are experiencing or have experienced some version of solitary confinement?
Yeah, so what I learned from these Harvard researchers is that in December 2024, ICE began reporting its use of solitary confinement in a different way to include all instances of what ICE calls segregation, including for vulnerable populations. And what that means is that the data very quickly showed a huge increase in the use of solitary confinement as the reporting changed. And what researchers believe is that the use of solitary in immigration detention is much higher than previously understood and is rising under the Trump administration.
All right. So, how does the current Trump era compare with what we saw under Biden? Do we have any firm numbers there?
So, the data that the researchers obtained through a FOIA request shows that more than 10,500 people were subjected to solitary confinement between April 2024 and May 2025. And the data show the practice increasing under the Trump administration. Now, we know the Trump administration has been increasingly using immigration detention as it pursues a massive immigration crackdown in the country. But we also know that ICE will use solitary confinement for a variety of reasons. That could be for punishment in the way that it is used at times in the prison system, but it can also be to separate people that it considers vulnerable populations from the general population. So, for example, someone with severe mental illness, someone whose identity makes it a risk for them to be in the general population. There's a lot we don't know about how solitary confinement is being used, but we do see in these numbers that it is being used far more than previously understood.
What are we actually talking about here practically, Lauren? How much time are folks spending in solitary?
So, according to this new research, the average consecutive days in solitary by vulnerable populations of people who have been deemed vulnerable and placed in solitary is upwards of 38 days. That's 38 straight days in solitary. What I can tell you, Taylor, is that United Nations human rights experts say that anything over 15 days in solitary confinement is considered torture.
Well, Lauren, on that point, what do medical experts say specifically here? What are the potential health consequences?
Yeah, the health consequences of prolonged detention and solitary confinement are well established. There are literally decades of research on this topic. Dr. Catherine Peeler, who is a medical advisor for Physicians for Human Rights who participated in this study, said that the consequences are myriad, from mental health consequences, including psychosis, depression that can lead to suicidal ideation or suicide, and physical ailments as well. Any kind of chronic condition can rapidly and dramatically worsen when a detainee is in solitary confinement for a prolonged period.
Okay. And what is the stance from ICE or the Trump administration on this practice?
ICE didn't respond to USA Today's request for comment, but they do maintain in online documents that segregation is supposed to be a last resort, in some cases, to protect vulnerable populations.
All right. Lauren Viagran covers the border and immigration for USA Today. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Taylor.
Baseball's Clayton Kershaw, considered by many as the greatest left-handed pitcher of his generation, announced he will retire after this season. The 37-year-old won the Cy Young Award, given to each league's best pitcher 3 times. And while not always matching those results in the playoffs, he won 2 World Series and will have another chance when the postseason begins in the coming weeks. You can read more about Kershaw's remarkable career at USA Today Sports. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Kaylee Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.